She caught them tangled in the sunroom, her husband, half-dressed, her daughter-in-law smug and breathless. Charlene Brooks didn't cry. She poured a cup of tea and watched their future shatter like porcelain. By spring, Peter was buried. Emily chose the suit. Charlene paid the bill. His name vanished from the trust, hers etched deeper. No confrontation, no chaos, just consequences. And when the tribute video played, the truth was framed in every still. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Charlene Brooks turned the key in the lock with her usual quiet precision, not expecting anything unusual as the door swung open into the polished stillness of her home. The late afternoon sun poured golden light across the parquet floors, pooling at the edges of the foyer like spilled bourbon. It was oddly quiet for this time of day. No distant TV murmuring, no ice clinking in a glass, no footsteps echoing down the long hallway. She stepped inside, heels making the softest echo against the walnut floorboards, and paused to inhale the familiar scent of lavender polish and the faintest trace of cigar smoke. But there was something else in the air today, something too sweet, too floral, and out of place, like a perfume that didn't belong to her. Charlene closed the door behind her and exhaled slowly, her breath calm and even, as though she hadn't just had an unsettling chill crawl up her spine. She carried a silver tray in her hands, her grandmother's, polished just last week, balanced with 3 delicate teacups and a white porcelain pot filled with fresh Earl Grey. She'd left the board meeting early, hoping to surprise Peter with tea and quiet conversation before dinner. A gesture from another time, she supposed now. As she passed through the front sitting room, her ears caught something, a muffled voice followed by a low laugh, a woman's laugh. She stopped. The sound was coming from the sunroom. The sunroom at the back of the house was Peter's favorite place, a room lined with tall windows, warm even in winter, and filled with potted plants she watered religiously every Saturday morning. Charlene's steps slowed, but she didn't hesitate. She walked down the hall, turning toward the sunroom, the tray steady in her hands. Her face remained composed, eyes sharp and thoughtful. The glass-paneled door at the end of the hall was slightly ajar, and through that narrow slice of space, she saw them. Peter stood with his back partially turned, his shirt unbuttoned halfway down. Emily was in front of him, pressed too close, her hand curled around his wrist. Her blouse hung awkwardly off one shoulder. Her hair was tousled, not by wind. Charlene stopped at the threshold. Neither of them saw her at first. The moment lingered, absurdly intact, for 1 second too long. Then Emily turned. Their eyes met. The teacup in Emily's hand slipped and shattered on the tiled floor with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the entire house. Peter jerked his head around, his face drained of color when he saw Charlene standing there, silent, unmoving. Charlene took a small step forward and crossed into the room. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She didn't ask why. Instead, she walked over to the rattan table in the center of the sunroom and, with the grace of someone setting down fine china for honored guests, placed the silver tray on its surface. The teacups clinked lightly, still perfectly aligned. Emily's voice broke the silence, trembling and hollow. "Charlene, it's not what it looked like." Charlene turned her head slowly, as if weighing the effort it would take to respond. Her eyes scanned Peter's face, then Emily's disheveled blouse, then the broken cup at her feet. "There's no need to explain," she said, her voice even, laced with a cool, terrifying control. "I won't interrupt your plans again." Emily's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. Peter took a step forward, as if trying to form a sentence, but Charlene had already turned away. She picked up the one intact teacup and filled it, her movements unhurried. The scent of bergamot wafted into the air. She stirred in a cube of sugar, watching it dissolve, then set the spoon down with precision. Without another glance at either of them, she lifted the tray again, minus 1 cup, and began walking out. Her heels clicked softly against the tile, unhurried, echoing in rhythm with her breath. At the doorway, she paused and looked down. A single shard of porcelain lay in her path. She stepped over it and kept walking. Behind her, she could hear Peter say her name, just once, quiet, almost human, and from Emily, "What are we supposed to do now?" Charlene didn't answer. She walked through the hall, turned left, and disappeared into her study, her spine straight as steel. Charlene stood in front of the tall window in Janine Abbott's office, arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the slow drift of clouds outside. She hadn't spoken much since she arrived, and Janine knew better than to push. Some clients came in sobbing or pacing. Charlene Brooks came in looking like marble, polished, cold, and unbreakable. Janine quietly flipped through the file laid open on the desk between them, legal paper clipped to bank statements, wills, partnership documents, the kind of file no one ever really wanted to open unless they were already imagining a life on the other side of a fracture. "Co-ownership's still fully intact," Janine said, running her fingertip along the asset sheet. "Real property, liquid accounts, and the business ledger. Nothing has shifted. Yet?" Charlene turned slowly, her expression unreadable. Her voice, when it came, was calm but cut like dry ice. "Because he hasn't tried to take it, not out in the open. Not yet." Janine nodded. "Most men like Peter don't announce. They assume." Charlene sat down across from her, smoothing the front of her dark wool coat. "He wants it all," she said simply. "I want what's mine." And silence. From both of them. Janine pursed her lips and leaned back slightly. "Then we'll move fast. First step, a freeze on joint withdrawals. I can push that through today." "And the funeral directive?" Charlene asked. "The trust Peter's parents left us. I assume he's still named as sole executor?" "Yes, but that can be redrafted. We can build a clause to shift that authority under a health-related trigger or emergency stipulation. If we revise the funeral policy now, you'll control it regardless." Charlene nodded once, not in agreement, but in confirmation of something she'd already decided. "Do it." Janine leaned forward again, scribbling notes. "I'll need your updated authorization on the file, and I strongly recommend updating your power of attorney forms while we're at it. If he retaliates through business channels, we want to be airtight." Charlene reached into her leather tote, pulled out a slim black wallet, and removed her ID. "I don't trust him not to be reckless, and I don't trust her to be silent." She handed it over. "Update it today." There was no tremor in her hand. Janine glanced at her, pausing just long enough to register the steel in Charlene's tone. "You're sure you don't want to file for separation formally? Or—" "No." The word landed like a gavel. "Not yet. I don't want courtroom drama. I want leverage." Janine didn't argue. She'd practiced long enough to recognize when a woman wasn't here for justice. She was here for strategy. Charlene leaned back and crossed one leg over the other, watching as Janine opened a second folder and began drafting the emergency financial protection order. Outside the office window, a small wind picked up. The clouds moved on. On the edge of the desk, Charlene's phone vibrated once. She ignored it. It buzzed again, this time longer. Janine paused her writing and looked over. "Everything all right?" Charlene reached for the phone with deliberate slowness. The screen lit up with a name she hadn't seen since that moment in the sunroom. Emily Brooks. Message. "Can we talk?" Charlene stared at the screen for several seconds, then clicked it dark without opening the message. "She'll reach out more," Janine said gently. "They always do. The guilt doesn't stay hidden when the paperwork starts moving." Charlene didn't answer. Instead, she stood and walked slowly around the office, her fingertips grazing the back of the leather chair, the edge of the bookshelf. When she turned back, her face had changed. Just slightly. Something about the angle of her mouth, the tilt of her chin. "I'm not worried about guilt," she said. "I'm worried about memory. People forget who I was before I married Peter." Janine raised an eyebrow. "And who was that?" Charlene met her gaze, unblinking. Someone no one could afford to underestimate. The silver bell above the cafe door jingled softly as Charlene stepped inside. A waitress gave her a polite nod, recognizing her as a regular, but knowing better than to speak first. The place was quiet, deliberately so. Linen-covered tables, muted jazz humming through the ceiling speakers, and windows that let in just enough spring light to feel warm but not cheerful. It was a place for deliberate meals and even more deliberate conversations. Charlene chose the table near the back window, one with 3 chairs and a clear line of sight to the door. She sat with her back to the wall, coat draped neatly over the chair beside her, and set her bag on the bench like a shield. The server arrived with water. She ordered jasmine tea without glancing at the menu. Greg and Emily arrived 5 minutes late. Of course they did. Greg came in smiling, arm loosely around Emily's back like he'd just won something. "Mom," he said, voice warm as ever, "you look sharp today." Charlene gave him a small nod. "You're kind to notice." Emily sat opposite Charlene, carefully arranging her napkin in her lap, though her fingers trembled ever so slightly. Her smile was forced, too white. She wore a cream blouse with pearl buttons and barely there makeup, trying for innocent. It didn't work, not on Charlene. "I hope this wasn't too short notice," Charlene said, lifting her tea as it arrived. "Not at all," Greg replied. "Honestly, it's good to get everyone out of the house. We've been overdue for a family lunch." Charlene stirred her tea once, twice, and didn't look up. "Yes," she said quietly. "Overdue." Greg launched into small talk, something about a new contract his firm had landed, the patio chairs he was refinishing on weekends, how good it felt to be around family. Emily chimed in occasionally with soft, timed laughs and nods, pretending the weight in the room wasn't bearing down on her shoulders. Her eyes kept darting to Charlene's face, looking for a crack. A clue. A trap. Charlene let them talk for almost 10 minutes before she folded her hands neatly on the table. "I've been making some changes to the estate structure," she said, her voice cutting gently through Greg's laughter. "Nothing drastic, but some adjustments were overdue." Greg blinked. "Estate? Like the business?" he asked, tilting his head. "Or the house?" "Both," Charlene said. "And more than that, the trust your father and I built. It's time it evolved. Janine is helping me draft a few new provisions, mostly to protect legacy holdings." Emily had stopped blinking. Her hands were still. Her water glass sat untouched in front of her. Charlene reached into her purse and slid a small white business card across the table toward Greg. "You should speak with Janine, too, just to be safe. Everyone should protect their assets these days." Greg frowned, picking up the card. "Wait, why would I? What does that mean?" Charlene offered him a small, pleasant smile. "It means you've worked hard for what's yours, and I don't want to see you lose it." Greg looked at Emily, confused. "Did something happen?" Emily's expression was stone. Her fingers dug into her napkin, twisting the edge like it might hold her upright. Her jaw twitched, and she tried to speak, but no words came. Charlene reached for her teacup again, completely unbothered. She took a slow sip and looked at her son. "Is something wrong?" he asked again, a nervous laugh buried just beneath the surface. Charlene didn't look at him this time. She placed the cup back in its saucer with a quiet clink and said simply, "Not yet." Emily's color drained so fast it made her freckles stand out. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She reached for her water with jerky fingers, spilling just a little onto the tablecloth. Greg, ever the fixer, dabbed it with a napkin, oblivious. The server returned to take their lunch orders, but Charlene handed her menu back untouched. "Just the tea for me today," she said, already standing. "I've had my fill." Janine's office was silent, save for the rhythmic clack of her keyboard and the occasional creak of her leather chair. The marble clock on the far shelf ticked softly. Outside the window, the clouds hung low, fat with April rain that hadn't yet committed. Charlene stood at the bookshelf near the window, her hands behind her back, reading the spines of law journals she would never need to open. She wasn't here to learn. She was here to ensure. Janine looked up from her monitor. "He tried it. 2 wire transfer requests this morning, both flagged. One was headed for a personal account in Atlanta, the other offshore." Charlene turned slowly, her expression unchanged. "And? I filed the emergency injunction at 8:05. Janine held up the court-stamped copy, still warm from the fax tray. "The account's frozen, and," she added, her tone cooler, "the funds have been legally redirected." Charlene stepped forward and accepted the paper. Her eyes scanned the page. To the Lexington Family Wellness Foundation, she read aloud. That's your placeholder name? Janine nodded. Tax exempt, public interest nonprofit, board seats to be determined, but you hold 3. Charlene allowed herself a brief smile. Good. He always hated when I gave money away. Before Janine could respond, the outer door flew open with the weight of entitlement and aftershave. Peter's voice hit the room before he did. Where the hell is she? Charlene didn't flinch. She moved to the leather armchair opposite Janine's desk and sat, calmly crossing her legs. Peter came in red-faced, jacket flapping open, tie askew like he hadn't fully dressed or just didn't bother. He ignored Janine entirely, eyes locked on Charlene. What the hell did you just do? Charlene leaned forward slightly, reached for the small tray beside Janine's desk, and began pouring coffee into a white porcelain cup. You take it black now, don't you? She asked, her voice smooth and unhurried. With that oat creamer Emily buys? Peter blinked at her, caught off guard by the familiarity of it. It disarmed him for half a breath, just long enough. She handed him the cup without waiting for his answer. He took it, because instinct did the reaching even when pride resisted. I froze the accounts, Charlene said simply. Your attempt to withdraw funds violated our partnership agreement and the business charter. Janine's injunction just made it official. Peter's jaw tightened. You don't get to... She raised a hand, palm out. Let's not pretend this is a surprise. You were sloppy and arrogant, and I'm not the woman I used to be. Janine cleared her throat. Mr. Brooks, as your counsel is not present, I'd advise you not to make any further statements. Peter ignored her. So, that's it? He asked, shifting his glare back to Charlene. You want war? Charlene gave a soft laugh. Not cruel, not loud. Just knowing. Number, I want peace. A structured one. Think of this as a financial separation trial. You'll have access to your stipend, your office car, your country club membership, but the decisions, the legacy, that stays in escrow until we determine who's truly earned it. Peter stared at her like he didn't recognize the woman across from him. Charlene sipped her own coffee slowly, then set the cup back in the saucer with a clean, decisive click. Or, she added, we can make it public. And I'll explain to your investors why their quarterly earnings got tied up in your offshore mistakes and your personal indiscretions. He didn't respond. Not right away. Instead, Peter turned and walked out without another word. The door closed hard behind him. Janine exhaled. You just bought yourself time, but you also lit the fuse. Charlene stood, straightened her coat, and gathered her papers. Then let's make sure we control the match. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't even look until they were halfway down the hall. Emily Brooks. No new messages. Just the last one still sitting unread. Can we talk? The call came at 5:12 a.m. Charlene didn't rush to answer it. The house was still, dark, wrapped in pre-dawn silence. She stared at the blinking screen from across the kitchen table, letting it buzz through one full ring cycle before lifting it to her ear. Mrs. Brooks? The voice said softly. I'm calling from the ER. Your husband, Peter Brooks, was brought in by ambulance an hour ago. We did everything we could. She didn't cry. She didn't ask how. She just listened as the words cardiac arrest and unresponsive on arrival filtered through the quiet. When the nurse gently asked if she'd be coming to identify the body, Charlene said, that won't be necessary, and hung up without apology. By the time Emily arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later, Charlene was already there, seated calmly in the waiting room beside Sister Anne Marie, the funeral director from St. Charles Parish. Emily's mascara had already started to run. Her hair, usually immaculately blown out, looked limp and rushed. She carried a hospital visitor badge in one hand and her phone in the other, thumb trembling over the screen. Where is he? She asked breathlessly. Charlene stood but didn't move toward her. They've taken him to the preparation room. You can see him before transport if you want. They'll give you a minute. Emily nodded, eyes wide and red, and darted down the hallway without another word. The door thudded behind her, leaving the faint hum of vending machines and distant paging calls in her wake. Sister Anne Marie looked over at Charlene. You seem certain. I am, Charlene said, not looking away from the hallway. The heart doesn't stop without a reason, and he gave it plenty. When Emily returned 15 minutes later, her face was blotchy and her voice raspy. "He looked peaceful," she said, more to herself than anyone. "Almost like he was still thinking." Charlene didn't respond to that. Instead, she gently opened the folder in her lap and passed a slim packet of documents to Sister Anne Marie. "Everything you'll need is in there. Arrangements, preferred service time, obituary draft, prepaid authorization." She turned to Emily. "You're welcome to help with details, like the music or the outfit." Emily blinked. "You're letting me choose what he wears?" "You were closer to him near the end," Charlene said, voice steady. "I'm sure you'll pick something meaningful." Emily, stunned and touched in equal measure, nodded. "There's a navy blue suit he wore to our anniversary dinner last fall. It was his favorite." Charlene smiled, tight-lipped and controlled. "Perfect." 2 days later, the funeral home called to confirm Peter's remains had been received and prepared. They confirmed embalming, casket selection, and suit delivery. Charlene asked just one question. "And the invoice?" "Fully prepaid," the coordinator replied. "Every item." She ended the call and stared out the window of her den, where the morning light filtered across the same sunroom floor where everything had first cracked open. The orchids needed watering. She would get to them. Across town, Emily stood in the boutique flower shop with her phone pressed against her ear, whispering. To someone who wasn't answering, "Greg, again." She hung up and turned to the florist. "Lilies, and maybe white roses. He liked classic things." The florist gently asked, "Are you handling the costs today?" Emily hesitated. "Oh, I thought the family—" "They've been covered," the florist said, looking back down at the receipt. "Everything's under Mrs. Charlene Brooks," Emily's voice faltered. "Of course, yes, that makes sense." The sanctuary of St. Charles Parish was filled with the kind of quiet that had weight. Not grief, not yet. Just waiting. Velvet ropes divided pews near the altar, and small ivory cards marked family-only seating on either end of the front row. The floral arrangements were tasteful but restrained. Ivory lilies, soft blush roses, nothing ostentatious. Peter wouldn't have cared either way, but Charlene had. She'd approved every bloom herself. Emily arrived early, of course. Her black dress was high-collared, dramatic in a way she hadn't earned. Her hair swept into a bun so tight it pulled at her temples. She walked with a sort of practiced mourning, shoulders set back, eyes already glossy, as though she expected her grief to be center stage. She tried to take the seat on the far left of the front pew, closest to the aisle. Sister Anne Marie appeared beside her with the same serene authority that made grieving families listen without question. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Those seats are for the surviving spouse and direct bloodline. Would you mind sliding one row back?" Emily blinked. She'll be here soon," Sister Anne Marie said simply. "It's best we keep the space clear." Emily looked like she wanted to argue, but too many heads were turning already. She nodded stiffly and moved back a row, taking the second seat behind the velvet cord. Moments later, the sanctuary doors opened again. Charlene stepped inside alone. She wore a dove-gray coat over a black silk sheath, a wide-brimmed hat with a short veil that softened the lines of her face without hiding her expression. Her walk was measured, unhurried. She didn't acknowledge the congregation as she moved down the aisle. No waves, no nods. She stopped at the casket for just a moment, not to touch it, just to look. Then she moved to the front pew, where a space had been saved beside Greg. He stood as she approached, his hand squeezing hers in a gesture of habit more than certainty. He was pale, eyes red. His tie was crooked. "Thanks for coming," he whispered. Charlene gave the smallest nod and sat beside him. She didn't speak again. The organ began its slow prelude, and the service commenced. The officiant, a man Peter had served with on a local foundation board, began the eulogy. It was all about Peter's accomplishments, his business accolades, community involvement, the scholarships he funded in his father's name. No mention of Charlene, no mention of family strife, and certainly no mention of Emily. Charlene sat quietly, her posture straight, her face a mask of cool attention. Emily leaned forward in her seat, whispering frantically to Greg. He nodded once, then shook his head the second time. His brow furrowed deeper with every passing minute. When the hymn began, Charlene reached over and took Greg's hand. It startled him, but he didn't pull away. She didn't sing. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. The slideshow came next, projected onto the high sanctuary screen as the music played on. Images of Peter's childhood, his college years, charity events, fishing trips with Greg, holiday dinners at the estate. But Emily wasn't in a single frame. Not from Christmas 3 years ago when she joined the family. Not even from their vow renewal photo Greg had framed on his desk. She sat frozen, mouth slightly open, fingers clutching the sides of the pew. Someone in the row behind her whispered, "That's odd. I thought she was his daughter-in-law." Another, "They were close, weren't they?" Greg looked over his shoulder at her once, just once, but his face said nothing. Charlene turned her head slightly and caught Emily's eye. Her expression didn't change. The wind had picked up just as the last handful of mourners drifted back toward their cars. The sun, which had burned through most of the cloud cover during the service, now slid behind a thick wall of gray. The air was sharp with the scent of freshly overturned soil and wilting floral sprays. Charlene stood at the edge of the open grave, her coat drawn tight at the collar, her gloved hands clasped loosely in front of her. The minister had long since left, and so had the polite crowd who didn't know Peter well enough to linger. Only 3 people remained: Greg, a groundskeeper waiting at a distance, and Emily, hovering several paces away like a woman trying to cross a rope bridge that no longer existed. "He's not going next to me," Charlene said, her voice low but firm. "He didn't earn that anymore." Greg's face tightened. He had dark circles under his eyes, like sleep had, stopped visiting him altogether. "Mom," he said, voice cracking, "it's just a plot. You don't have to make it personal." Charlene turned to face him. "It's a grave. It's nothing but personal." She looked back toward the velvet-draped casket below. "That space next to mine was meant for the man I married, not the man who died." Emily stepped forward, suddenly bold. "You don't get to rewrite everything just because he's gone." Charlene turned slowly. "Don't I?" Emily drew in a breath and pulled something from her purse, an envelope. She held it out, not to Charlene, but to Greg. "The estate keys. I need them. The attorney says everything's still being sorted, but I have a legal right." "You don't," Janine said flatly, stepping into view from behind the nearby hedge, coat flaring behind her like punctuation. "Your name was removed from all accounts and legal holdings as of last week. Formal filings were sent this morning. If you need copies, I'd be happy to resend them." Certified Emily's face flushed. "He promised." Janine didn't blink. "He revoked?" Emily looked to Greg, who had gone quiet again, jaw tight, staring at the dark space beneath the casket lowering frame. "Greg?" But Greg was already walking toward Charlene. He stopped a few feet from her, not meeting her eyes. "Did you do this behind my back?" Charlene didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled a slim manila envelope from her coat pocket and held it out. "You should see what your wife and father were doing behind yours." Greg hesitated, then took it. He opened the flap slowly and slid out a handful of glossy photos, stills, taken from the sunroom camera. The angles were clear. So were the faces. The silence between them wasn't peaceful. It was precise. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. "You went through our—" Charlene raised an eyebrow. "Your what?" Greg stood still for a long moment, the photos trembling slightly in his hand. Then, without a word, he turned and walked toward his car. The envelope still clutched at his side. He didn't speak, didn't look back. Emily started to follow him. "Greg, please, let me explain." But the only response was the sound of the car door closing. Charlene didn't move. She watched as Greg's taillights disappeared down the winding cemetery path. Then she looked back at the second gravesite, the empty one that had once borne her name next to Peter's on the headstone order form. "That plot," she said quietly, half to Janine, half to herself, "was sold this morning." Janine nodded. "Lexington Veterans Group took it. Said it'll go to someone who actually earned the space." Charlene exhaled slowly. Good. Emily's voice came out hoarse. You really had it all planned out, didn't you? Charlene didn't even look at her. I didn't plan the betrayal, Emily. Just the consequences. Emily stood barefoot in the foyer of the house she'd shared with Greg, wrapped in a shawl she hadn't bothered to take off since the funeral. She hadn't slept well in days, barely at all since the graveside confrontation. Her phone was silent. Greg wasn't answering. Not texts, not calls, not even the pitiful voicemail she'd left at 2 a.m. She stepped over a pile of unopened mail and opened the front door to let in the weak April sun, hoping it might burn away some of the dread curling in her chest. Instead, it brought Janine Abbott. Flanked by a sheriff's deputy and a woman in a crisp navy suit, Janine stood on the porch with a manila folder tucked under one arm and a clipboard in her hand. Ms. Brooks, Janine said, voice crisp and professional. You're officially being served with a breach of morals eviction under the marital property lease agreement. Emily blinked. What are you talking about? The home you're occupying is owned by Charlene Brooks, Janine said, flipping open the folder. Your name was never added to the deed. The tenancy was informal and conditional, tied to your marriage to Greg and to the preservation of moral clauses standard in family estate contracts. Emily crossed her arms, her voice brittle. This is harassment. The woman in the suit stepped forward. You'll find the court notice attached. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. Movers will arrive Wednesday morning to retrieve items belonging to Mrs. Brooks and her son. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property. Emily looked between them, face flushed and rigid. I'll call my lawyer. Janine didn't flinch. Do. She left the papers on the front console table and walked out without waiting for further protest. The deputy tipped his hat on the way out. Ma'am? Emily stood frozen as the door clicked shut behind them, the house suddenly too large, too empty, too echoing with decisions that couldn't be undone. 3 days later, Charlene stood across the street in a beige trench coat and watched as the movers carted out what was legally hers: leather furniture, curated antiques, the gallery prints she'd loaned the young couple. When they first moved in, not a single item that bore Emily's name was touched. Sister Anne-Marie arrived quietly beside her, holding a paper-wrapped basket tied with soft twine. For Greg, she said, handing it off gently. Just something to hold him over. Sandwiches, tea, a note. Charlene nodded, her eyes not leaving the front door. He's staying at the guest house until we sort things through. And Emily? Sister Anne-Marie asked. She's got nothing left to fight with, Charlene replied. Just noise. That evening, Emily marched into the county clerk's office and filed a civil claim against the estate. She claimed emotional duress, unlawful displacement, and an implied financial partnership. She left with a carbon copy of her filing and a shaky smile that cracked the moment she got back into her car. By Friday, the claim had been dismissed. The judge issued the ruling without even requesting a hearing. That weekend, Charlene sat at her desk with her reading glasses on and her will open in front of her. A pen rested between her fingers. The spring rain whispered against the windows. Soft, but steady. Greg's name was already there. She didn't change it. Emily's was not. She didn't add it. Instead, she signed the updated page and slipped it into a pale blue folder marked Final. She sealed it with a gold tab and placed it neatly into her safe beside the deeds, foundation papers, and funeral receipt. She closed the safe, turned the dial, and stood. Her reflection in the glass of the grandfather clock caught her by surprise. Not older, not broken. Just certain. The church bulletin email went out at 7:04 a.m. No fanfare, no announcement. Just a simple footer line, below the weekly prayer list and bake sale reminders. In loving memory of Peter Brooks, tribute video prepared by his wife, Charlene. A hyperlink beneath. Unlisted. Quiet. Intentional. By the time the 10 a.m. service began at St. Charles Parish, the video had already been viewed by over 200 people. Most of them were members of the church. Many were from Peter's business circles. A few were from Emily's curated list of social followers, forwarded by mutual friends with comments like, "Have you seen this?" and "Did you know?" The video was short, just under 3 minutes. It opened with black and white photos of Peter's childhood, fishing with his father, shaking hands at a Rotary dinner, holding infant Greg at the hospital. Then it eased into color. Music swelled. Photos of Peter with Charlene on their wedding day, their 25th anniversary, a charity gala, boardroom celebrations. The footage was tasteful, polished, familiar. Then came the shift, a grainy still from the sunroom, Peter's hand resting on someone's waist, her face just out of frame. Then another, sharper, this time, the same woman, turning slightly toward the lens, her profile unmistakable. Emily. The final photo was in color. Peter, seated, Emily leaning over him with a drink in her hand, her fingers brushing his shoulder. A blurred reflection in the glass behind them. Charlene, standing just outside the frame, watching. The screen faded to black. The music stopped. One line appeared in white serif font. May what's hidden rest as honestly as what's buried. And then it was over. Emily was in her car when she saw the message. 3 unread texts from a church acquaintance. 1 link. No subject line. She clicked without thinking. 10 seconds in, she dropped her phone. By 30 seconds, she was pulling over to the side of the road, shaking hands gripping the steering wheel, mouth dry, heart jackhammering in her chest. By the time the video ended, she was screaming into voicemail after voicemail, her attorney, her cousin, Greg. No one picked up. She drove straight to the funeral home, marched into the front office, and demanded to know who had authorized a breach of privacy. Sister Anne-Marie greeted her calmly behind the desk, her hands folded neatly atop a closed ledger. "I'm sorry," she said, "but there's no breach." She used footage from inside her own home, Janine confirmed later that day when Emily stormed into her office. "There are no audio violations, no defamatory statements, just images, legally obtained, factually accurate, and protected under personal memorial use." Emily's face was red, blotchy. "She ruined me." Janine tilted her head. She revealed you." That night, Greg showed up unannounced at Charlene's door. He looked hollowed out. Grief, disbelief, shame twisting in his shoulders like too much weight hung from invisible hooks. Charlene stepped aside and let him in without a word. In the kitchen, she poured him a cup of tea. He didn't drink it. "She filmed it?" he finally asked. "No," Charlene said softly. "Peter did. 5 years ago. Security camera in the sunroom. I just happened to inherit it." Greg sat down heavily, staring into nothing. "Why didn't you show me sooner?" "I needed you to see it for yourself, when you were ready to see all of it." He closed his eyes. A long silence passed, then he opened them and whispered, "I'm done." Charlene didn't ask what he meant. She knew. The courthouse envelope landed with a soft slap against Emily's doorstep. No knock, no warning, just a neat delivery in a manila sleeve marked "Private." Hand delivered. She stared at it for nearly 2 full minutes before picking it up. The paper felt too heavy for its thickness, like the weight came not from content, but consequence. Inside, Greg's signature on the divorce petition. The box checked for irreconcilable differences. The attached affidavit cited emotional betrayal, sustained deceit, and concealed infidelity. Beneath that, a copy of the amended prenuptial terms Janine had helped Charlene reconstruct. Emily's name wasn't listed anywhere, not even in the margins. Greg moved into the guest house behind Charlene's main estate the following evening. He didn't bring much, just a duffel, a few suits, and a photo of his daughter, Lisa, from when she was 10. Charlene met him at the garden path, holding a key in her hand. "It's yours for as long as you need," she said. No apology, no lecture, just space. A clean square of dignity carved out of the wreckage. Greg took it without hesitation. "Thanks, Mom." His voice was hoarse. Charlene offered a quiet nod, then turned back to the main house, leaving him alone with the key and the silence that came after betrayal. 2 days later, a familiar gray sedan pulled into the estate's circular drive. Lisa stepped out, now 20, taller than Charlene remembered, her hair pulled into a neat ponytail, her jeans cuffed at the ankle. She walked to the porch without hesitation, and when Charlene opened the door, she didn't say a word. She just wrapped her arms around her grandmother's waist and held tight. Charlene stood still, then slowly let her hand rest on the girl's back. A warmth she hadn't expected welled in her chest. "I saw the video," Lisa said quietly. "I told Dad to leave her a long time ago. I'm just glad he finally did." Charlene pulled back, studied her face. "You're wise for 20. Lisa smiled, soft and crooked. "Pain grows you up fast." Charlene nodded. "Yes," she said. "Yes, it does." That night, Charlene sat at her desk again, glasses perched on the bridge of her nose, a notary waiting quietly by the fireplace. The will was open, a clean page inserted, a new line added. To Lisa Mae Brooks, "I leave my grandmother's wedding band and the full education trust to be released upon her 21st birthday or enrollment in graduate studies." Charlene signed with a steady hand. The notary stamped it with a solid, final thud. Meanwhile, Janine sat in her office compiling a thick binder, final asset realignments, trust redistributions, and tax exposure projections. She reviewed the chart again. Charlene holding the estate, Greg listed as successor trustee, Lisa added as a conditional beneficiary. Emily, erased. She scanned the whole thing one final time and then slid the binder into a fireproof safe, locking it with a quiet click. The estate had stabilized. But the story hadn't ended. Back in the guest house, Greg sat at the small writing desk by the window. Lisa's photo was propped beside him, and he stared at it for a long time before pulling out a legal pad. He didn't write anything. He just stared. Behind him, through the back window, he could see the silhouette of Charlene in the main house, walking down the hallway with a stack of papers in her arms. She paused once, as if sensing him watching. Then she kept walking. They didn't speak that night. They didn't need to. The reception hall buzzed with warm chatter, polished shoes clicking over marble tile, and the clink of champagne flutes against china. The annual Lexington Civic Legacy Banquet wasn't known for surprises, but this year was different. This year, the award for community leadership was going to a widow with quiet fire in her eyes and a name the room suddenly knew not for her husband's contributions, but for her own. Charlene Brooks stepped onto the stage slowly, her silhouette crisp under the soft amber light. She wore a fitted black dress with long sleeves, minimal jewelry, and no hint of apology. Her heels clicked once as she reached the podium, the applause folding into a hush. Sister Anne-Marie watched from the front row, hands gently folded in her lap, face serene. On either side of her, Greg and Lisa stood tall. Lisa's arm was looped through her father's. Greg's eyes never left his mother. Charlene placed her notes on the podium, but didn't look down. "Legacies," she began, "are strange things. We think we inherit them, that we're born into them. But more often than not, we build them while no one's looking, quietly, slowly, sometimes even in rooms we weren't invited into." A murmur of agreement ran through the crowd. She paused just long enough to let the words settle, then continued. "This honor isn't just for leadership. It's for endurance, for learning when to speak and when to outlast, for knowing the difference between memory and myth, and for choosing, deliberately, how your story ends." In the back corner of the lobby, Emily stood behind a pane of tinted glass, arms crossed tightly, watching the woman who had outplayed her in every arena. The security guard hadn't needed to say much when she tried to enter. "You're not on the list, ma'am." Emily had smiled, said she understood, and stepped aside. But now she stood there, eyes narrowed, jaw set, waiting for the speech to end like someone holding their breath at a locked door. On stage, Charlene concluded without flourish. "We don't get to choose what we're remembered for, but we do get to choose when to stop being afraid of who remembers." Applause rose like a wave, steady, loud, sincere, not thunderous, but earned. Greg and Lisa met her at the base of the stage. The photographer, a young woman with an eye for moments, raised her camera. "Just the family, please," she said gently to the crowd. Charlene stood between them, one arm around her son, the other around her granddaughter, both of them tucked close. The flash popped, the moment sealed. Later, when the guests had filtered out and the volunteers were folding linens and stacking programs, Charlene walked through the now empty City Hall atrium. The air smelled faintly of roses and wax. She paused at the far end of the building, an old office that once bore Peter's name on the door. The plaque had been replaced last fall after his retirement. It now read, Charlene Brooks, Director, Brooks Family Foundation. She opened the door and stepped inside. The room smelled like cedar and new paint. His old desk had been replaced with a minimalist table, no leather chair, no glass decanter, just clean lines, soft light, and a file cabinet full of the future. She ran her hand across the surface once, not in nostalgia, but in confirmation. Behind her, the glass door closed with a click. The den had always been Peter's sanctuary. Dark wood paneling, a walnut liquor cabinet, and walls lined with taxidermy and Ivy League diplomas. The only room in the house Charlene used to knock before entering, not anymore. The first thing to go was the leather recliner, the one he used to sink into like a throne after meetings, then the bar cart, then the mounted Marlin he'd refused to part with, even when the estate appraiser suggested downsizing. Charlene stood in the doorway as the last piece of old carpet was hauled out. She didn't flinch when the chair left a dent in the hardwood. Didn't ask to save a single thing. By the end of the week, the space was stripped bare, and by Monday morning, it had become something else entirely. The new nonprofit office was clean and open, painted a soft, matte blue that caught the morning light in calming waves. The air smelled like eucalyptus and printer paper. 2 desks sat side by side near the bay window, each equipped with a laptop, a neat stack of intake forms, and a ceramic mug, one reading, "Keep your dignity," the other, "Tell the truth, anyway." The foundation was officially filed under the name The Resilience Room. Its first initiative, a support group for women who had been publicly humiliated, quietly betrayed, or forced to rebuild with no blueprint, no cameras, no press, just coffee, conversation, and permission to be angry without apology. At the first meeting, 6 women showed up. By the third, there were 12. By the 5th, they had a wait list. Charlene didn't lead the sessions. She facilitated. She listened. She passed the Kleenex box when it needed passing, offered silence when silence was stronger than sympathy. She wore soft sweaters, not armor. Never sat behind a desk when she could sit in a circle. The office filled with fresh tulips every Friday. Greg brought them. Lisa arranged them. Emily's blog post went live the following Thursday. She titled it, "I was the villain in her story, but you don't know mine." It was 3,000 words of slippery denial, claiming emotional neglect, painting Peter as a vulnerable man looking for connection, framing the affair as a mistake born of loneliness. She ended it with a line she must have thought sounded profound. "No one is ever just a monster. Sometimes we're just broken in places the world doesn't see." Charlene didn't respond. But the readers did. The post got 82 comments. 2 were sympathetic. The rest skewered her. "You slept with your father-in-law and blamed grief? No accountability, just prose. It's not loneliness if you're texting him from his wife's guest bathroom." The next morning, Janine issued a single-paragraph public statement on behalf of the Brooks Family Foundation. "We will not respond to fiction masquerading as explanation. We remain focused on building something useful from what was left behind." By the end of the month, Lisa started showing up early to the foundation office, offering to help with logistics. She organized volunteer intake, sorted donation letters, digitized tax receipts. She was quiet, steady, and sharp. Charlene watched her from the doorway one afternoon, arms crossed gently over her chest. "You sure you're not getting bored of all this?" she asked. Lisa smiled without looking up. "This is the first place I've been where people don't lie to each other. I like that." Charlene nodded. "Then you're in the right room." That weekend, Sister Anne Marie came by with a small package wrapped in parchment paper. "I found this when I was cleaning out a back room at the church," she said. "Thought it might belong here now." Charlene opened it slowly. Inside was a simple framed print of Psalm 23, hand-lettered in faded ink. At the bottom, in Anne Marie's cursive, "He prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies." Charlene stared at it for a long moment, then placed it on the wall directly across from the main desk, eye level, exactly where visitors would see it first. The convention ballroom shimmered with soft lighting and polished silver. Rows of white-clothed tables curved inward toward a low stage, where a single glass podium stood under a cone of light. Behind it, a banner in navy and cream that read, "Lexington Women's Leadership Summit, Reclaiming the Narrative." Charlene adjusted the cuff of her tailored blazer one last time and stepped onto the stage. No walk-up music, no preamble. Just the quiet, anticipatory hush of a room full of women who knew too well what it meant to rebuild their names. She looked out over the audience. Greg sat in the front row, hands folded, face lined with emotion he didn't bother to hide. Lisa sat next to him, phone discreetly raised to take a photo just as her grandmother reached the mic. That image, Charlene standing tall, lips parted mid-thought, spotlight catching in the silver threads of her jacket, would be reposted 24 times by morning. Charlene didn't read from notes. She didn't need to. When someone breaks your trust, she said, voice even and measured, they expect your silence to follow. They count on your shame to do their cleanup. The crowd leaned in. But silence is not recovery. And shame is not inheritance. There were nods. Audible exhales. One woman wiped her cheek with a cocktail napkin. Charlene continued, gaze steady. Betrayal doesn't just undo your plans, it rewrites your history. It makes people question the version of you that existed before it ever happened. But you know what no one talks about? Her hand hovered just above the podium. The part where you stop cleaning up after people who broke things they never built. The applause began before she even finished the sentence. She paused, allowing it, then lifted her chin. I am not here tonight because I was gracious. I'm here because I outlasted. I kept showing up, even when it hurt, even when no one believed me, even when all I had left was my name, and I had to defend it like it was land someone was trying to steal. There was a moment of electric stillness before the entire ballroom rose to their feet in a standing ovation. It wasn't polite, it was full-bodied, reverent, earned. Charlene stepped back once, nodded in quiet thanks, and left the stage with her shoulders square, eyes forward. Back at her table, Greg rose first to meet her. He didn't speak, just pulled her into a firm, proud embrace. Lisa leaned in next, eyes shimmering. That was the one, she said softly. That was the one they'll remember. Charlene smiled. Let's make sure it's not the last. 2 blocks away, a dark sedan idled in front of the bus terminal. Inside, Emily sat in the back seat, staring out the window with smudged mascara and a cracked phone screen. She had 1 suitcase, no return ticket, and no one waving goodbye. She stepped onto the bus platform alone. No one noticed. That weekend, Charlene finalized the paperwork with the scholarship board. It wasn't in Peter's name. It wasn't about redemption. It was called the Rosemary Endowment in honor of her mother, a teacher who had once worked 2 jobs to send Charlene to college. Full tuition, women over 30, must be returning after hardship, Charlene told the advisor. No essays. Just proof of perseverance. When the documents were signed and sealed, she placed the approval letter in a box beside the foundation's annual report. On Sunday afternoon, Lisa drove alone to the Lexington Veterans Cemetery. The air was clean, still. The grounds were quiet. No fresh burials, just rows of stone and spring blossoms bending toward the sun. She found Peter's marker without trouble. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She simply knelt and placed a small bouquet of calla lilies at the base. White, plain, undramatic. Not a gesture of forgiveness, just closure. She stood slowly, looked down once more, then turned away without hesitation. As she walked back toward her car, the breeze picked up. She didn't look back. Charlene, watching from the distance behind the cemetery gate, exhaled slowly. Not everything needed words. Some victories were generational. Some final chapters didn't require a narrator. They simply closed themselves. The house was quiet, but not empty. The air held the faint scent of brewed oolong and lemon oil polish. Outside, the wind played through the tulip trees in gentle passes. Inside, Charlene sat at the desk in the study, formerly Peter's, now hers, hands poised above the keyboard with the same steadiness she once reserved for cross-examinations and board votes. She wasn't typing just a letter. She was leaving a map. Dear Lisa, what I learned too late, you'll learn early. This letter isn't about vengeance. It's about preparation. It's about not needing to raise your voice because you've already written your proof. About knowing where the fire exits are, even when the room looks safe. Charlene paused, letting her fingers hover. Then she kept going. Quietly, meticulously, like someone drawing a clean line through years of noise. She included every detail: access protocols for the Family Foundation's accounts, the security codes for the safe behind the hallway panel, the name of the woman in finance she trusted to outlive them all, a list of passwords, written in code naturally, a map of the trusts, color-coded, where the original deeds were stored, who to call at the courthouse if something ever went missing, and at the bottom, in italics, there is nothing sentimental in knowing how to protect what you've built. That is love in its oldest form. Later that evening, Charlene walked to the filing cabinet tucked inside the cedar armoire and slid in the folder marked Closure, Brooks Case. Inside, the original camera stills, copies of Peter's financial diversions, witness statements, timeline logs, the blog post Emily had published, annotated with contradictions, a printed transcript of Greg's divorce filing, the letter from the scholarship board, every thread, every knot, tied down and accounted for. The cover sheet was stamped in red, closed. Charlene didn't lock the cabinet, she just shut it. On Monday, Greg joined the team at the Resilience Room. He didn't ask for a title, and Charlene didn't offer one. He helped set up chairs before the Thursday group, fixed the temperamental printer, and quietly sat in on an afternoon session about rebuilding co-parenting boundaries after divorce. His presence wasn't loud, just consistent. That afternoon, Lisa popped by with pastries and a draft of the new digital intake form. Greg looked up from the copier and offered a tired smile. "She's turning this into something real." "She already did," Lisa replied. "You're just finally noticing." That same week, Sister Anne-Marie walked into the Resilience Room for what would be her last formal visit. She wore navy and cream, a ribbon pinned to her shoulder. "I'm retiring next month," she said gently, handing Charlene a canvas tote. "I've already arranged my replacement. Young, sharp, but I wanted you to have these." Inside the bag, 3 leather-bound journals. "My private ones," she added. 30 years of church politics, crisis cases, family implosions, and prayers that weren't meant for publication. Charlene held the journals to her chest. "I'll protect them." "I know you will." Anne-Marie reached for her coat, but paused before leaving. "You've done more than survive this, Charlene. You've architected a second life from the ashes of your first." Charlene's voice was low. "I didn't think I was building anything at first. I just didn't want to drown." Anne-Marie smiled. "That's how all cathedrals begin, with someone who refuses to sink." That night, Janine dropped by with the updated quarterly filings. She handed Charlene a slim white binder marked Structural Growth, Q2. "Final copies," she said, taking off her coat. Charlene flipped through it, eyebrows lifting slightly at the numbers. Janine smiled. "You turned grief into a blueprint." "I had help." Janine leaned against the kitchen counter, folding her arms. "Maybe, but you were the only one who didn't flinch." Charlene shut the binder, her nails tapping once on the cover. "You don't flinch," she said, "when you know where your power lives." That evening, Lisa came home late from class and found the letter. It was on her pillow, in a pale blue envelope, with her name written in ink so sharp it could have cut glass. She opened it, read it once, then again. She didn't cry. She just picked up her phone and typed one sentence into a note app. "I will not inherit fear." She saved it. Then, without fanfare, turned out the light. The cemetery was quiet. No wind, no bird call, just the kind of stillness that only comes when the story has finally spent itself. Charlene stepped out of the car slowly, adjusting the collar of the tailored charcoal suit she wore like armor. The lines were crisp, the fabric matte. It had once belonged to Peter, his final navy wool number, dry cleaned and boxed after the viewing. She'd had it recut to fit her frame, not to mock him, but to reclaim the shape of what had once fit only him. Lisa walked beside her, silent and steady, hand wrapped around Charlene's. There was no priest this time, no hymns, no organ. Just a scattering of chairs arranged at the crest of the hill, where the non-profit had sponsored a new bronze plaque facing the headstone. It bore no scripture, no surname, just an inscription carved cleanly into the metal, in memory of mistakes and what we built after. A breeze stirred faintly as the cloth drape was lifted from the plaque. Charlene's face didn't move, but something in her shoulders settled. Behind them, Greg stood a few paces back, watching without speaking. He didn't need to. The foundation board was assembled, the donors had arrived. The city councilwoman who once avoided Peter's calls now stood near the back with her hands clasped, chin slightly bowed. It was a funeral in shape, but not in sorrow. It was an unveiling. Lisa stepped forward and laid a small white rose at the foot of the new marker. Then she leaned in and whispered something that only Charlene could hear. Charlene smiled, not bitter, not broken. Just done. Done with pretending pain didn't reshape the bones. Done with waiting for apologies that never arrived. Done with picking up pieces of someone else's ruin. Later that afternoon, the house was quiet again. Charlene stood in her bedroom, facing the closet. The suits were gone, all of Peter's, even the ones she'd boxed years ago, donated, repurposed, or sent off to the community center for their interview program. The wood hangers were still there, evenly spaced like ghost ribs. In their place, a row of navy file boxes, each labeled with a year, a season, or a name, and beside them, tucked into a slim compartment, a stack of pale blue envelopes, letters, some to Lisa, some to Greg, a few to no one in particular, just reflections sealed for later, all written in the same sharp, deliberate ink. Charlene ran her hand along the top box, then closed the closet door gently. No more shadows in that room, no more waiting for a voice that wouldn't return. She moved to the vanity, opened the drawer, and took out a lipstick she hadn't worn since before the board meetings turned into battles. She applied it slowly, carefully, a muted rose, steady against the grain of time. Her reflection met her eyes, lined but unflinching. She picked up the folded program from that morning's unveiling and slid it into the drawer beside her journal. Outside the window, the magnolia tree swayed once. Software reassuring. Downstairs, Lisa's laughter echoed from the kitchen as she recounted something about an applicant who had shown up to the resilience room orientation with a rescue cat and 2 loaves of banana bread. Charlene smiled. Not everything needed resolution. Some things just needed room to keep growing. She stood, adjusted the hem of her blazer, and walked to the door. Before she turned off the light, she glanced back once, at the dress hanging in the far right corner of the closet, the one Emily had helped Peter pick for Charlene's 50th birthday dinner. Still unworn, still tagged. She didn't reach for it. She didn't need to.